Yeah. And I think, again, I mean, we've all read our leadership books, and I remember
Yeah,
people saying to me, you want to hire your next boss. And with that, whether they're your next boss or not, you bring people with incredible talent, and you've got to have, back to humility, you've got to have the confidence and humility to understand that, again, you don't know it all. Let's
right.
work as a team to figure it out. And when you give that ownership to people, what you can create as a family and a team is like nothing I've ever seen. And I shouldn't say that. It's like what we created at Biohaven.
Yeah, yeah, I know that. So love that. I mean, I think that's why you, as I said before, why people follow you. There's a roadie group that would get on a bus and go everywhere we go because of that authenticity, that ability to collaborate and bring people together. There's true psychological safety where we work together. I mean, you always ask people, DJ always asks people like, what's working? Where are we getting stuck? What the hell do we need to do different? You told really good stories as well. So I think as a leader, you told really good stories, which I also thought was something that brought people into the standards and expectations that you had for them. How important is storytelling to you as a leader, especially from a leader who led large sales organizations, who led large operations units within large organizations? Is storytelling something that came to you, or is it something that you figured out over time that it's important to be able to tell stories to connect with people?
It's a great question. And I believe that it's a forgotten or ignored art at times. For me, again, going back to family, it was always one of those things that my father took much pride in. My brother, great storyteller, embellishes a bit. You've got to kind of try to figure out that balance of what's true and what's not. For me as a leader, and I know we'll kind of talk about management, leadership, and coaching. As a leader, for me, leadership is about, how you convey yourself and things in a broad setting or to a group. And again, that could be 10 people, it could be 1,000 people.
Right.
And storytelling is so key, in my opinion, it's the proverbial sort of acting hook, right? If you start a story with something that breaks down walls, right? I think, you've read sort of similar things, that using the right profanity,
Yeah. You have that art perfected.
can break down walls. And people say, again, back to the authenticity. Wow, this guy is real. This guy is human. But it allows you to set the stage and tell a story, because to just show data, it doesn't tell a story. You tell that story with data. It pulls people in, and it allows, you see an engagement, and the nonverbals that can kind of lead you to believe people are buying in, meaning like head nodding, it could be eye rolling, or, raising of the eyebrows, whatever it is.
I've seen hand slapping when people see you present and they hear, a profanity word there. After a while, they expected it. And when they heard it, you heard high fives and you're like, Chris is getting real. He's talking to the people.
Well, and it's the right profanity. I want to be clear.
No doubt. Yeah. No,
but
like I said, it's artfully and skillfully done.
Well, you know it, right? And I've seen you do it. We talk about music, right? The passion. You've got to have the passion. If you're truly passionate and you believe it, people are going to see that. And then to wrap a story around it, it can't be blah, 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 blah. Stop, right? Let me read my teleprompter. It's, all right, let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about the success story that came with this. And also let's talk about the failures and the learnings. Like I've said a million times, like the failures that I've had over the years have truly helped me learn so much. Now, let me tell you a story about that, right? Where some of the self-deprecation comes into play. It's just, in my opinion, just such a better way to bring people in and enjoy the story together versus putting a bunch of numbers up on a slide or just reading a script. Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, no, totally. So you talked a little bit about this concept of manager, leader, coach, right? And we've all played those roles. One of the things I've seen in my life as being a leader is you've had people who are really good managers, but they're not really strong leaders or coaches. I really believe that as artificial intelligence comes into our world and continues to permeate both personal and professional life, that for a manager, AI is going to do a much better job of managing all the things a manager needs to do. looking at numbers, reports, managing expense reports. Those things are important. You have to manage process and lead people. But there's nobody who's really just a good manager and not a good leader, coach who's going to involve people and drive performance. When you think about those three concepts, first of all, how much time does somebody spend in the role as manager, leader, and coach? I'm going to start there. What do you think about manager, leader, and coach, and how much time should somebody spend in those roles?
So I think you framed it up well, right? From a management standpoint, manager to me, and this is how I started in the industry, 26 years ago, is that it was all about process. You said it. So manager for me is the day-to-day now, as I see it, are the day-to-day requirements of doing the job. You said it,
Right.
Expense report. So as your manager, I'm going to make sure we get our expense reports in on time. I'm going to make sure we stick with budget. I'm going to make sure we're compliant. Those types of things. And years ago, that was enough to get by with big multi-blockbuster brands in a portfolio. I mean, I tell people when I started, I had the pleasure of selling Plavix, Pravachol, and Glucophage all in the same bag. I think at the time they were $14 billion combined.
Right.
That was easy. All I had to do was to go home and do my expense report. But that's not where we should be today. And we should not have just managers. I'll get to the percentages of what that looks like moving forward. Leadership, I talk a lot about, the leader aspect of, for me, that is, and some people would disagree, I'm sure, is, what? I have a team call every Friday. That's how I represent myself and the expectations I set amongst the team, meaning accountability is consistent across all 10 people. Here are the strategic initiatives I have from my boss and from the organization. Guys, let's talk about it. Let's talk about this strategy of selling one product for 2 indications and 1 NDC. How do we do that? Let's talk about it. Towing the company line to some extent, but also allowing the freedom to push back, right?
Yeah.
How do you represent yourself in front of a group? And is there consistency there with the broader organization? Because as a leader, I've got to align with the top and then execute against it with those that work with me and for me. Coaching is so sorely missed. And coaching to me, and again, some may disagree, is the one-on-one. It's the conversations we have to say, hey, TB, we just had this great leadership call. Tell me about what you think. Tell me what you think about the strategy. All right, how are you going to execute it? All right, well, listen, again, back to the accountability piece. I agree. That, to some extent, this bullet point kind of deviates from the strategy. Tell me why. All right, great. How are we going to execute that? But maybe tailor it a little bit. To me, that coaching is one-on-one, and it's an ability to sort of transfer knowledge and then that coaching becoming self-coaching, meaning you got 10 reps. I can't be with 10 reps all the time. Right. So that one-on-one coaching is so important. Now, when I leave that rep, do they coach themselves through the day-to-day of being in front of customers? So in my opinion, the most successful leaders can bring all of those 3 components, which I think you and Rich have defined so well, together and finding the right balance. And I think how you find that right balance starts with the expectations of the leader above you. My perspective would be 80% should be devoted to coaching, right? Meaning leadership is incredibly important, but if you're on conference calls all the time, your reps aren't out doing what they should be doing. Yeah. Management, if you set the appropriate expectations around expense reports, compliance, things like that, it should be sort of self-guided, which allows much more time to coach. And that is so critical to anyone's success that I think that is kind of how I see the balance of where coaching fits from a percentage standpoint. And what's in coaching is a much more detailed discussion, meaning business acumen, clinical sell, those types of things. But that's a big bucket. And I think that's where the majority of time should be spent.
Yeah. Well, you've seen some of the data, because I know you talked about this on a call with a company called PDG, where they showed data that only on a percentage-wise, leaders are only spending 9% of their time coaching. I mean, when you said 80%, so we're about 71% short right now of that. So I definitely agree with you there. I think the one thing I always felt about coaching was there's 2 things, and I looked at research of a ton of different coaches. I think you hit on 2 different ways of coaching. I always felt like if you look at Pat Summit, or you look at John Wooden, or you look at the best coaches, they set a team expectation. Kind of your team call on Friday is that team leadership. I'm setting expectation. We're discussing strategy and tactics to overcome the issues that we're facing or the way we capitalize on this game or in this marketplace. And then there's that individual one-on-one coaching where I'm looking at somebody, I'm saying, what are the skills they need to do well to execute and optimize our plan? And that's why I think most coaches, they're okay at the leadership part, the big team call where they can set expectation. It's the one-on-one coaching where they think their job is to observe and assess somebody doing that job. Instead of, to your point, let's figure out what good looks like together. Let's really practice what good looks like. And I think so few coaches, they don't practice with people. They feel like, hey, I hired really good people. They're good at their job. I'm not going to practice. Well, LeBron James practices. He's practiced the same damn drill since he was 6 years old. But it's funny how he can practice 2 to 3 hours a day, yet our salespeople and managers don't feel like they need to practice at all. They can just kind of wing it and go in and look at data and go, okay, I'm going to talk to Dr. Deluzio about this, or whatever role you're in and whatever organization or marketplace you're in. Practice with the mindset that needs to happen from a coaching standpoint, because it establishes to your point what good looks like. And so when I'm not with them, we both co-create a standard of what good looks like. So I don't have to, you can self-coach yourself now. If we both agree what good looks like, what a good sales process looks like, what a great story tells like, sound like, and it's easier for them to walk away and reach that standard, and me continue to coach to elevate them in different areas. But I think to your point, people just don't coach because I think they feel like there's this halo effect of I hired good people. I'm here to assess and observe and ask Chris how this call went, instead of saying, I don't want to ever ask you how the call went. I want to know how that call's going to go before, so we have a standard of what it looks like. So when I leave you, you can self-coach yourself. Does that make sense?
It does, and there's a couple things there, right? To your point, well, I've hired great people. Well, you have, but you can also learn from them as a good coach to take that to other people. Or to your point, they're self-coaching. You see some incredible things. Why not share best practices, right? And allow them to help coach across the broader team. So there's that piece. And I think to your point, for me, it goes back to, like I said, the accountability and setting expectations. In a lot of cases, and what I've seen, and you and I have lived this in the biggest pharma organization to a very small one, it starts at the top and what the expectations are there. I will give a real world example of my last organization where we knew the data, and you saw the data, that we needed to do some things with our coaches to improve our performance generally as an organization. And I don't think people bought into it. And I think a lot of it was my fault in terms of how I didn't set the appropriate expectations. Yeah. And then when we did, it was like, okay, great, Chris, I hear you, but what data do we have to support it? When you're able to show people data around the impact that coaching can have, it will take that number, like you said, 9%, it'll take it dramatically higher, which is a good thing. So I think you have to add some data. The other piece to it, again, taking expectations not out of it, but is the coach of the coach.
Yeah.
I fell into the trap that you just said. I said, well, I've got these second line leaders who are the best in the industry, and they are.
Yeah.
And with that, my assumption was, they know what they're doing from coaching they know how to coach the coach. Absolutely, they do. In fact, they told me they did.
Yeah.
And in most cases they did, but there was some refinement that needed to be done to say, all right, guys, you may think you got it, but let's get back into how we coach the coach. We've got the other things figured out, or we're figuring them out. Let's go back into looking at how our first line leaders are coaching their reps, and let's coach them on how to do it, so they can then self-coach. And then for me, as that third line leader, how do I coach the coaches of the coaches?
Yeah.
So it's got to be a consistent expectation across the organization, and it can't be a one and done. It's got to be, how do we get into it, and how do we figure out to keep this alive? And that all comes down to the expectations and eliminating barriers. One of the biggest traps, in my opinion, organizations fall into is, hey, I need you on a conference call. Hey, I need you to do a business plan. Hey, I need you to do some training. Yeah. All right. Well, to your point, that takes that coaching number or percentage down every day, and then you get it 9%. So what can you do to eliminate those barriers so people can actually go out and coach?
Yeah. No, totally agree. I think that setting expectation, I do think that there's a disconnect between, we were both RDs together. You've been an RD, then you've been at this third level of leadership that where you have to coach people who are coaches, other coaches, which is a different level. And I think sometimes when we get to that RD level, people feel like, and I think RDs get pulled in tons of different directions. They're on marketing calls, right? They're on calls with, MSLs or other people, account managers. And I think they sometimes forget that their job is a talent developer because they feel themselves as a business. They're business leaders, but business is driven by the people, and people drive business when they're better prepared to do that. So I think just shifting that mindset to you're a talent developer. As an RD, your job is to not only drive our business, but you drive business through people, and people have to be prepared to drive business. And that's where I think, to your point, is how do we make sure that they understand that coaching is as important as a KPI? And it should be probably the most important KPI.